In this video, we're going to compare 3 HDMI 2.1 TVs from LG, Samsung and Sony and find out which is the best for Sony PS5 gaming. Hello everyone, my name is Vincent Teo. I am a TV reviewer and ex-professional calibrator. Today, we're going to compare 3 of the most popular 4K TVs with HDMI 2.1 support from LG, Samsung and Sony in the UK for the year 2020. On your far left is the LG CX or C10 OLED. In the middle is the Samsung Q90T QLED, and on your far right is the Sony XH90 LED LCD television, also marketed as the BRAVIA X900H in the USA. All 3 TVs are 55 inches in screen size. At the time we filmed this video in October 2020, the LG CX commanded a street price of £1,400. The Samsung Q90T would cost you £1,300, while the Sony XH90 was the cheapest at £1,000. Because of my camera's limited dynamic range, YouTube's encoding, and also the off-axis color shifting on these televisions, what you are seeing in this video won't truly represent what I'm seeing in person, so please do not judge picture quality directly from this video alone. All 3 TVs have had their latest respective firmware updates installed and have been calibrated in HDR game mode for a level playing field. Yes, we are comparing HDR game mode in this comparison video because we are judging these televisions for playing games on the Sony PlayStation 5 next-gen console which arrives next month. And game mode provides the lowest input lag for the most responsive gaming experience. In an ideal world, we would be doing this comparison video using an actual PS5, but because our YouTube channel focuses on reviewing televisions rather than console gaming, we are not even on the radar of Sony Interactive Entertainment for a PS5 sample. We know many of you will want to get a new television before you receive the PS5 so that you are ready to go on day one, which is why we are doing this video now, using our objective testing methodology to help you decide which TV to buy among these 3 HDMI 2.1 televisions. We haven't had a 3-way since before the pandemic, so let's get right into it. Input lag is probably the most important parameter for an enjoyable gaming experience, which we measured on all 3 televisions in game mode using the Leo Bodnar 4K lag tester. At 60 Hz, the Samsung Q90T was the fastest at 10 milliseconds, followed by the LG CX at 13 milliseconds, then the Sony XH90 at 16 milliseconds. At 120 Hz, all 3 TVs were roughly equal at around 6.5 milliseconds, which is super responsive. Before I proceed with the rest of the comparison, I would like to give a quick shout out to UK electrical retailer Crampdale Mall Leeds, who have been kind enough to loan me all these 3 televisions for this comparison video. Without them, this video wouldn't even be possible, so please support this channel by considering buying your next television from them. Even if it's not the LG CX or C10, the Samsung Q90T or the Sony XH90, call 0113 244 6607, mention HDTV test, and you will receive great price and service. Thanks again for your support. Okay, game mode usually cuts down video processing to achieve the lowest input lag, which can affect the effectiveness of local dimming on full array local dimming LED LCDs such as the Samsung Q90T and the Sony XH90. On this zone count pattern from the Spears & Munsell UHD HDR benchmark disc, the LG CX maintained inky blacks with no blooming artifacts, since pixel-level light control is inherent in the self-emissive OLED technology and does not degrade in game mode. Between the Samsung Q90T and the Sony XH90, the Q90T exhibited more blooming in game mode, even though it has almost 4 times the number of local dimming zones on the XH90, suggesting that a lot had to be sacrificed to obtain the lowest input lag. Actual gameplay followed the same trend, with the Samsung Q90T appearing a bit more washed out in dark scenes than the Sony XH90. Needless to say, the LG CX did the best here, since it's capable of producing true blacks. At the other end of the contrast ratio spectrum, the tables were turned. OLED TVs such as the LG C10 are restricted by ABL or automatic brightness limiter circuitry, which caps full field luminance to below 150 nits, whereas LED LCDs can go brighter full screen with the peak brightness of the Samsung Q90T being higher at 1100 nits to the XH90's 700 nits. As a result, bright gameplay sequences look the most impactful on the Samsung Q90T. Then it's a toss-up between the LG C10 and the Sony XH90 depending on the APL or average picture level of the scene. The eagle-eyed among you may also have noticed that the fire looked more saturated and fiery on the Samsung Q90T, thanks to quantum dot technology which conferred the TV higher color volume than both the LG CX, whose brighter colors were diluted by WRGB subpixel structure, and the Sony XH90, whose PFS phosphor backlight reached 93% of DCI-P3 in UV terms. Moving on to motion, you need to understand that motion interpolation, all those calculations of new frames, usually adds a sizable amount of latency, which is why it's almost always disabled in game mode. Samsung TVs since 2018 do allow some motion interpolation in game mode with only a 1 frame increase in lag times at 60 Hz. The company calls the technology Game Motion Plus. However, Game Motion Plus is not available with a 120 Hz source signal on all Samsung TVs including the Q90T, and all other motion settings are also grayed out in game mode. The LG CX and the Sony XH90, on the other hand, allow black frame insertion or BFI to be engaged in game mode, but the hit in HDR brightness was just too severe to warrant its use. So we ended up comparing the motion performance on all three televisions without motion interpolation and without black frame insertion or BFI, based on this 120 Hz footage from the versatile Meridio 7G signal generator. Using a slow motion camera, we verified that none of these televisions were dropping frames. The rapid flicker on the Samsung Q90T was caused by its backlight PWM being out of sync with our camera and was significantly less obvious in real life. In terms of motion sharpness, the LG CX looked the clearest, thanks to OLED's near instantaneous pixel response time. Between the LED LCDs, the Samsung Q90T came across blurrier due to heavier black smearing and color ghosting than the Sony XH90. We used this rotating clip from the Spears & Munsil UHD HDR benchmark disc to assess gradation, and found the Samsung Q90T to be the smoothest, followed by the LG CX, then the BRAVIA XH90 or X900H, which lacks the smooth gradation decontouring filter implemented on higher-end Sony televisions. Next, we checked screen uniformity, which can make or break your gaming experience, especially when panning across the sky in-game. For example, the LG C10 OLED was the cleanest, without any sign of the discrete effect or DSE, banding or color tinting, while the Sony XH90 came second, with only some minor darkening on all four corners of the screen. Our Samsung Q90T unit was a distant third, exhibiting not only some DSE and FALD grid patterns, but also strange rolling scan lines at certain backlight intensities. Because the Sony PS5 is a next-gen console, we made sure to test out all the key HDMI 2.1 gaming features on all these three televisions, namely ALLM or Auto Low Latency Mode, VRR or Variable Refresh Rate, and 4K at 120 Hz support. Let's start with ALLM, which is commonly considered to be the least useful HDMI 2.1 gaming feature, since you can still engage game mode manually using the remote control even without ALLM. Both the LG CX and the Samsung Q90T support ALLM out of the box, whereas the Sony XH90 or X900H is still awaiting a firmware update. However, when paired up with a PlayStation console including the upcoming PS5, the Sony XH90 would automatically switch into game mode if auto picture mode was engaged, providing a similar functionality to ALLM. The LG CX offers 4 HDMI 2.1 ports for maximum versatility in case you want to hook up other HDMI 2.1 sources in addition to the PS5. The Sony XH90 has 2 HDMI 2.1 inputs, one of which is also eARC, and the Samsung Q90T only has 1 HDMI 2.1 port on HDMI 4. All three TVs accepted and displayed 4K at 120 Hz video signal, but the Sony XH90 seemed to be applying some sort of additional processing to the signal, resulting in resolution loss. most noticeable on fine text and icons. Initially, we thought that this was a similar issue to the Sony XH9's inability to display full 8K resolution, but 1440p and 1080p resolution at 120Hz also appeared to be affected on the XH90, making us doubt our own bandwidth limitation theory. Anyway, we sent our findings to Sony, who acknowledged the issue, and here's their response in full. When playing 4K 120Hz, the TV will have to process loads of data, and in some cases leading to bandwidth limitations slightly because 4K 120Hz has huge amount of information in itself. In this case, we prioritize smoothness of 4K 120Hz because we believe customers' expectation will be the smoothness. To compensate for such limitation, and also when the picture is moving, the difference of clarity is less noticeable, so we tune the signal processing and the picture quality so that the net results on the display would be no issue to enjoy 4K 120Hz in any kind of circumstances. Based on this statement, Sony thinks that this issue won't be bothersome for owners who are playing PlayStation 5 games from a normal viewing distance, compared to those who intend to use the XH90 as a PC monitor. The BRAVIA X900 hasn't received a firmware update to enable VRR or variable refresh rate, so we will focus our attention on the LG C10 and the Samsung Q90T. Both TVs could do VRR at 4K at 120Hz in HDR, but each has its own problems. The LG CX exhibited some stuttering in the high 90s to 120Hz range, which should be fixed in a future firmware update, and near black gamma brightening that's unlikely to be completely eradicated, since changing the refresh rate would alter the gamma response of all panels, be it LCD or OLED. The PQ EOTF tracking on the Samsung Q90T already wasn't too linear to start off with, but it really went bananas with VRR enabled, leading to wonky blacks and overly contrasty midtones. Last but not least, let's talk about HGIG, a means for TVs to disable tone mapping to avoid double tone mapping when the correct tone mapping can be performed entirely by an HGIG compliant game console. We should do a drinking game based on the number of times I say tone mapping. The PS4 Pro already supports HGIG currently, so it's highly likely that the PS5 will do so too. With the latest firmware updates, the LG CX and the Samsung Q90T support HGIG, whereas the Sony XH90 doesn't. Let's sum up. If you've watched this video so far without any bias or preconceptions, hopefully you'll agree with us that all things considered, the LG C10 OLED is the best TV for Sony PS5 gaming. It has the deepest black which doesn't degrade in game mode, the sharpest motion, the cleanest screen uniformity, and 4 HDMI 2.1 ports to boot. The LG C10 also ticks all the boxes for HDMI 2.1 gaming features, ALLM, VRR, 4K at 120Hz. It's got them all on top of HGIG support. But we do realize some gamers are understandably worried about the possibility of permanent screen burn, despite reassuring OLED burn-in test results from my colleagues at rthings.com and ourselves, making the Samsung Q90T and the Sony XH90 viable alternatives. Between the two, the Samsung Q90T can go brighter with higher color volume, but suffers from worse uniformity, whereas the Sony XH90 is middle of the road in most areas, which shouldn't be surprising given its mid-range status and price point. Which TV you end up buying will depend on your own budget and circumstances, so good luck and happy PS5 gaming. If you would like to watch some of our other videos on HDMI 2.1 and next-gen console gaming, I've created a playlist here if you'd like to click on it, and I'll see you in the next video.